Now beginning in our 26th year, a quarter century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, your all amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition number 1376 with a release and air date of Saturday, July 12th, 2025. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone. Heard every week on the amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the United States, and podcast on the Internet since 1993, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1376 of This Week in Amateur Radio.
Ham Shack Hotline makes the tough decision to shutter operations at the end of August. We will have the details. Amateur radio operators embedded with first responders in the Texas floods provide critical communications. The FCC proposes fast-track regulation to streamline obsolete rules and regulations. The FCC finally gets its Spectrum Auction Authority reinstated. Solar storms have caused the U.S. Global Positioning System to show results that are off by 70 meters. AMSAT is seeking additional volunteers for Moon Day at Dallas Frontiers. A pirate broadcaster blasts as unconstitutional, the FCC finds, in a landmark court challenge. Special call signs are issued for this year's International Amateur Radio Union contest. Trump's Big Beautiful Bill may slow down your internet speeds. We will tell you why. The ARRL issues a call for nominations for director and vice director. We will have this month's results from the Volunteer Monitoring Program. And, why settle for mediocre food on the space station? A French astronaut, Sophie Aidnot, KJ5LTN, will take Michelin-Starred chef meals to the station with her. We will tell you all about it in this week's report.
These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Ono Bench Shop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will tell us about antenna modeling with genetic algorithms. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will takes us aboard the Wayback Machine to the year 1922, where we find new broadcasting stations packed the air with signals as growing crowds of listeners in the general public clamored for even more, and Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover, who convened the first radio conference, which included radio luminaries from across the spectrum, government, the new radio broadcasting industry, academia, and, of course, the amateurs. We'll have this month's Volunteer Monitoring Report, and we'll stop by and visit with Bill Sailors, AJ8B, in the DX Corner with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studios here in Naugatuck, Connecticut, where it's cloudy but not as hot as recent weekends, I'm Steve Sawyer, K1FRC.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Albany, New York, in the Geek Cave studios, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2MOB.
And reporting live from the warm and humid Space Coast in Florida, I am Ed Johnson, W2PH.
And reporting this week from our news bureau in Syracuse, New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from a muggy Troy, New York news bureau, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our news bureau in Sandwich, Illinois, where the best sweet corn you've ever tasted is ready to be harvested, I'm Jordan Kurtz, Kilo Echo 9, Bravo Papa Oscar.
And reporting from our Catskill Mountains homestead in upstate New York, where the blueberries are turning blue, little eggplants are hatching, and the sweet corn has begun to tassel out. I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where summer is living up to her reputation, read Hotter 'n Hades, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, sweating buckets.
Leading off our news this week in Amateur Radio received the following press release from the Ham Shack Hotline. To our valued Ham Shack online community, it is with a heavy heart that we announce the sunset of the Ham Shack Hotline project, effective August 29th, 2025. What began in 2018 as a simple idea in the humble closet of K1WIZ quickly grew into something none of us could have imagined, an expensive global communications network built by and for amateur radio operators. From those early beginnings, Ham Shack Online evolved into a robust VoIP system supported by multiple servers around the world with over 7,000 interconnections at its peak. This incredible journey was made possible by the generosity of donors worldwide and the tireless commitment of the Ham Shack Hotline team, who volunteered their time and expertise to support and grow the network. Your trust and participation helped shape Ham Shack Hotline into a valuable and widely respected resource for the ham radio community. However, with success came scale, and with scale came increasing demands. As the network grew, so did the workload on our small team. Balancing this effort with our responsibilities to family, careers, and life outside the shack has become increasingly challenging. We have always taken great pride in the reliability and service standards of Ham Shack Hotline, and we recognize that we can no longer maintain those standards at the level our users deserve. After much thoughtful discussion and reflection, the Board of Directors has unanimously voted to sunset the project, giving our community ample time to transition to other services by the end date. This was not an easy decision. We know how much this network means to many of you, and it means just as much to us. Ham Shack Hotline was built with love, run with dedication, and supported by an incredible community that made it all worthwhile. In the spirit of giving back, the remaining cash reserves of Ham Shack Hotline, after settling final operating expenses, will be donated to a charity that supports veterans. We'll announce the recipient of this donation soon. From the bottom of our hearts, we thank each and every one of you for being part of Ham Shack Hotline. Whether you joined us on day one or just discovered the network, your involvement helped shape something truly special in the amateur radio world. 73 from the Ham Shack Hotline team, where hams connect, 2018 to 2025.
Volunteer amateur radio operators serving in the ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, and the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, or ARES, are embedded with local served agencies in the areas of Central Texas affected by devastating floods. With more details on the important communications that amateurs are providing, we go to League Headquarters where John Ross, KD8IDJ, files this special report.
The needs and assignments have been changing, but ARES volunteers are stepping up to meet the dynamic needs of their communities. This is a very fluid situation. It changes by the hour, said ARRL South Texas District 7 Emergency Coordinator Terry Jones, K5LGV. The trained ham radio operators were activated starting on Friday, July 4th, 2025. Radio amateurs are providing communications capabilities to agencies whose primary systems were damaged in a flooding event or where they suffer poor connectivity due to the terrain. ARES members helped the American Red Cross with a setup of a reunification shelter in response to the floods. 10 hams were assigned to search and rescue teams. Dozens of health and welfare messages were passed by ham radio operators who provided a critical link when phone lines were overwhelmed. A lot of this is tied to circuit overload, preventing folks from making direct contact with family members in the area, said Kevin McCoy, KF5FUZ. During the flooding event and subsequent search and rescue missions, ARES members have been deployed to serve many different counties, including hard-hit Kerr and Kendall counties. Mutual aid has been offered between several surrounding ARRL sections. We'll have more updated information as it comes in on these Texas floods. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The Amateur Radio Emergency Service consists of licensed amateurs who have voluntarily registered their qualifications and equipment with their local area's leadership for communications duty in the public service when disaster strikes. Amateur radio operators use their training, skills, and equipment to provide communications during emergencies when all else fails. Hams serve their communities when storms or other disasters damage critical communication infrastructure, including cell towers and wired and wireless networks. Amateur radio can function completely independently of the internet and phone systems. An amateur radio station can be set up almost anywhere in minutes. Hams can quickly raise a wire antenna in a tree or on a mast, connect it to a radio and power source, and communicate effectively with others.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
The Federal Communications Commission announced plans this month to vote on a new fast-track procedure aimed at removing outdated regulations more efficiently without the need for the traditional public notice and comment process. In a draft rule released on Thursday, the FCC proposes eliminating an initial set of 18 obsolete regulations. The agency also seeks to empower FCC staff with delegated authority to use this streamlined direct final rule process in the future, provided actions comply with the Administrative Procedures Act. This direct final rule approach allows the FCC to act swiftly in repealing regulations that no longer serve the public interest, bypassing the usual lengthy rulemaking procedures. Citing a 2001 D.C. Circuit decision, Utility Solid Waste Activities Group versus the EPA, the FCC emphasizes its authority to remove rules that are impractical, unnecessary, or contrary to the public interest without prior notice and comment when such rules have minimal impact on industry and the public. FCC Chair Brendan Carr, who launched the Delete, Delete, Delete initiative earlier this year, is leading the effort to simplify the removal of outdated regulations. The proposed repeal mainly targets legacy regulations governing common carriers, including several cable rate rules that the FCC describes as obsolete due to technological advancements and changing marketplace conditions. The provisions set for repeal plainly do not serve the public interest any longer because they govern obsolete technology, outdated marketplace conditions, expired deadlines, or repealed legal obligations, the FCC stated in an accompanying fact sheet. If approved, the new rule would automatically repeal identified regulations absent any significant adverse comments, while still providing an opportunity for public input on the agency's assessment. Additionally, the proposal clarifies that FCC bureaus and offices can utilize this fast-track procedure in other cases where prior notice and comment are deemed unnecessary, allowing for efficient regulatory updates with requiring a full commission vote. The FCC underscores its commitment to proceed with transparency and at the full commission level for the initial set of repeals planned for July, reflecting a history of eliminating outdated or unwarranted regulations. The FCC is currently controlled by a narrow Republican majority, with a one-vote margin following Commissioner Olivia Trustee's recent appointment. Representatives for Democratic Commissioner Anna Gomez were unavailable for comment.
The Federal Communications Commission regained its ability to hold spectrum auctions when President Trump signed the One Big Beautiful Bill into law on July 4th. The FCC's auction authority had lapsed since March 2023. Reinstating the FCC auction authority wasn't the only good news for wireless. The law calls for the government to identify at least 800 megahertz of spectrum to be auctioned between the 1.3 gigahertz to 10.5 gigahertz range, with exceptions for the 3.1 to 3.45 gigahertz and 7.4 to 8.4 gigahertz bands that are currently occupied by military services. Of course, the organization representing the big three wireless carriers was elated over the passage of the legislation, even though it apparently removes the possibility for the industry to get hold of the lower 3 gigahertz band that it so desired for many years. CTIA President and CEO Ajit Pai thanked Trump for his extraordinary leadership and vision, particularly on wireless issues during this process. This legislation represents an historic milestone in wireless innovation. It will encourage next-generation wireless technologies, accelerate wireless deployment for the benefit of all American consumers, and secure our global technology leadership, Pai said in a statement.
A person apparently scaled the 321-foot broadcast tower that services WAMU 88.5, the Washington, D.C. area's national public radio news station, on this past Tuesday afternoon. D.C. police said they had negotiators on the scene of a barricade situation that was confined to the communications tower on the 4400 block of Massachusetts Avenue Northwest, which is located on American University's campus. American University owns WAMU's operating license. A police spokesperson called the situation still ongoing. American University warned the campus community to stay away from the area in the email, but said there was no safety concern to the AU community. It appeared police had the area secured from multiple entrances by the evening, and there was a drone flying close to the tower. Police told members of the public to move out of line of sight of the tower. An eyewitness at the scene saw a figure partway up the tower. WAMU's radio signal was briefly affected on Tuesday afternoon, according to Chief Advancement Officer Leslie Van Sant, who said the station had powered down to the tower to support the emergency response. The public radio station maintains a backup broadcasting arrangement in Virginia. We continue to monitor services for disruptions as we recognize the importance of access to news and information for the local community during this busy time, WAMU General Manager Erica Pauley-Hayes said in a statement. WAMU's tower is a 321-foot tall steel structure and the largest FM broadcast antenna in the nation's capital. The public radio station leases space on the tower to multiple other local radio stations. It was not immediately clear if those station signals were also affected. In an update just released, it was noted that the individual who had climbed WAMU's broadcast tower died this past Friday morning. American University confirmed his death in a statement to WAMU, and MPD has ruled it a suicide. The area around the tower remains an active investigation site, and people are asked to avoid the area.
Amateur radio operators in Puerto Rico will represent the United States in a worldwide amateur radio contest during the International Amateur Radio Union's HF World Championship on July 12th and 13th of 2025. Here with more details on this contest is John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The operators will use the American Radio Relay League ARRL headquarters station call sign W1AW/KP4. The identifier of KP4 is added to indicate the signal is being transmitted from Puerto Rico. We are very happy and honored that ARRL has given us the opportunity to use its call sign for this important contest, said Angel Santana, WP3GW, Public Information Coordinator for the ARRL Puerto Rico section and the amateur radio operator in charge of organizing the 2025 event in Puerto Rico. Although W1AWKP4 has been used in recent years in special events, the particularity this year is that in addition to representing the United States, it takes place in the context of the founding of the IARU 100 years ago, which makes it more attractive. While we are on the air as W1AWKP4, ARRL will use NU1AW, the official call sign of the IARU, Santana added. ARRL headquarters in Newington, Connecticut is also the International Secretariat of the IARU. The contest begins at 1200 UTC Saturday, July 12th, and runs through 1159 UTC Sunday, July 13th. Both single and multi-operator stations may operate the entire 24-hour period. For full IAR contest rules, visit arrl.org. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The call sign 1AW was originally issued to Hiram Percy Maxim, co-founder of ARRL, and the first president of the IARU in the 1925. W1AW became the official call sign of the ARRL headquarters station and is today one of the most recognized amateur radio stations in the world, with its transmission of bulletins, contests, and messages during emergencies. ARRL is the International Secretariat of the International Amateur Radio Union and a team of operators, and they're planning to activate the International Secretariat call sign NU1AW from the W1AW facility. The objective of his year's IARU HF Championship is to support amateur radio self-training in radio communication, including improving amateur operating skills, conducting technical investigations, and intercommunications with other amateurs around the world, especially IARU member society headquarters, using the 160, 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10-meter bands.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
The numbers for 2025 ARRL Field Day continue to grow. As we go to air, 3,227 entries have been received, and each day the list gets bigger, according to ARRL Contest Program Manager Paul Burke, N1SFE. Get those entries in, he encouraged. The deadline is July 29th. It was a big year for ARRL Field Day on social media. 260 public posts across several platforms used the hashtag OctothorpeARRLFD. That doesn't even cover posts in groups or on private pages. The public posts alone reached 3.5 million viewers. There was also significant growth in news media coverage of 2025 ARRL Field Day. Using ARRL's media monitoring suite, staff was able to track that amateur radio public information volunteers generated $37.5 million in ad value equivalents year-to-date around ARRL Field Day alone. That's a metric that tracks the amount of money that would have to be spent to buy advertisements that get the same number of viewers that news stories or earned media did. That's up from $18 million in 2023 and $20 million in 2024. There were 1,810 media mentions of ARRL Field Day year-to-date, a 70% increase from 2024. We're hearing from clubs that were featured in coverage that people have been calling and wanting to get into amateur radio, said ARRL Public Relations and Outreach Manager Sierra Harrop, W5DX. It shows that the outreach value of ARRL Field Day is significant.
Don Lynn Jr., ND7L of Nampa, has been appointed Section Manager of the ARRL Idaho Section effective July 9th, 2025. Lynn has served as the Assistant Section Manager since 2019 and the State Government Liaison since 2020. He is an ARRL Life member. Lynn will serve the remainder of a term expiring September 30th, 2026. He replaces Dan Marler, K7REX, who resigned from the position due to health issues. Marler has served in the role since 2019.
It is time for this month's Volunteer Monitoring Report. The Volunteer Monitor Program is a joint initiative between the ARRL and the FCC to enhance compliance in the amateur radio service. This is the current activity report of the VM program. A traffic and awards net operating on 7.185 MHz was issued an advisory for deliberately starting the net on top of the Andaman Island D expedition, VU4AX. A case involving an Alabama station continuously calling another station on 20-meter FT8 was resolved informally and the robotic one-way transmissions stopped. Technician operators in Texas and Michigan were issued advisories for operating FT8 on 40 meters. Technicians have only CW privileges on that band. A technician operator in Florida was issued an advisory for FT8 operation on 15 meters. Technicians have only CW privileges on that band. A technician operator in Iowa was issued an advisory for FT8 operation on 20 meters, a band on which technicians have no privileges. A commendation was issued to a station in Colorado for exemplary net control operation on 14.295 MHz on February 16, 2025, from 1600 to 1800 UTC, in which he demonstrated exceptional courtesy and efficiency in checking in stations under crowded band conditions. A commendation was issued to an operator in North Carolina for exceptional CW, QRP operation on 7.025 MHz from 0100 to 0120 UTC on April 5, 2025. The operator demonstrated exceptional courtesy and efficiency in making contacts with numerous operators under crowded band conditions. A question and answer session was presented in person to the Mount Airy VHF Radio Club in Mount Airy, Pennsylvania. A virtual VM program was presented to the Bella Vista Amateur Radio Club in Rogers, Arkansas. The totals for monitoring in this report were 1,480 hours on HF frequencies and 1,849 hours on VHF frequencies and above, for a total of 3,329 hours. We thank Volunteer Monitor Program Administrator Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH, for this report.
Youth on the Air Camp Junior is set to debut on July 25th through the 27th, 2025, at the National Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting in Westchester, Ohio. The camp is a sub-regional 3-day version of the YOTA region-wide camps. Campers will experience similar activities as the region-wide camps, but on a smaller scale. The camp will focus on building strong relationships with peers, mentors, and parents while developing new and refining old skills. YOTA Junior in the Americas is closely modeled after the Kids on the Air program in IARU Region 1, which covers Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Campers, all of whom are licensed amateurs under age 15, will also have the chance to operate special event station Whiskey 8 Yankee, featuring cutting-edge HF and VHF UHF radios that many only dream of having a chance to use, and a wide array of antennas. The Westchester Amateur Radio Association, Whiskey Charlie 8, Victory Oscar Alpha, is located at the museum and is a division of National Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting.
A new study has revealed that the May 2024 Gannon solar storm caused GPS signals to be off by up to 70 meters, severely impacting farmers who lost over $500 million due to manufacturing GPS-guided machinery during peak planting season. The storm, the most powerful in 20 years, created widespread ionospheric turbulence that distorted GPS signals for up to 2 days and produced stunning auroras visible to USA observers as far south as Mexico and Spain. Boston University researchers used a network of fixed GPS receivers originally intended for tectonic studies to measure the disturbances, uncovering a massive wall of ionospheric plasma that threw off positioning data across North America. This GPS disruption affected not only agriculture, but also aviation, exceeding the safety margin for altitude precision during landings. Experts warn that this storm was mild compared to a potential Carrington-level event, which could cause even more severe global consequences. Scientists suggest that real-time ionospheric monitoring and AI-based signal correction could help mitigate such risks in the future.
ABC Science website has reported on the Vera C. Rubin Observatory in Chile, which has released its first images captured by the world's largest and highest resolution digital camera. These high-resolution shots showcase stunning astronomical features both within and beyond our galaxy. ABC Environment reporter Peter de Kruif and astrophysicist Jonty Horner from the University of Southern Queensland both marveled at the extraordinary detail, with Jonty describing the images as remarkably sharp even when zoomed in to the farthest points. The secret lies in the Rubin Observatory's powerful setup. A telescope with an 8.4-meter-wide mirror funnels light into a massive, state-of-the-art camera. While most smartphones boast around 12 megapixels and high-end digital cameras about 100 megapixels, the Rubin Observatory's camera dwarfs them all with a colossal 3,200 megapixels. You can find the latest images online.
Mexico's president has threatened legal action over debris from a recent SpaceX rocket explosion near the U.S.-Mexico border. President Sheinbaum said the government is investigating potential violations of international law due to environmental contamination. The explosion occurred during a ground test for a SpaceX Starship at its Starbase facility in Texas, sending a large fireball into the sky. Mexican officials are now conducting a comprehensive environmental review focused on the nearby state of Tamaulipas, This comes after the United States Federal Aviation Administration approved an increase in annual Starship launches from 5 to 25, despite warnings from conservation groups about threats to wildlife. President Sheinbaum emphasizes that any resulting lawsuit would be based on scientific findings and legal analysis. If filed, the lawsuit would follow another recent case in which Mexico sued Google over the labeling of the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America for users in the United States. This change is seen by Mexico as a violation of its sovereignty and a distortion of geographical naming conventions.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. Available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX as part of Ham Radio's oldest ham radio magazine on the air, This Week in Amateur Radio. I'm Bill, AJ8B. If you're watching this on YouTube, the text of this will be included in the show notes. You won't have to remember calls, dates, URLs, or other details. You can just check the show notes. As of this Saturday, there will be 168 days until Christmas. Time is flying, so we better get started. I received an email this week with the question, quote, "You said that when sunspots are around maximum that we will have several years of great DX. However, I check my radio every day right now and the band seems to be dead. What gives?" Well, instead of putting together an educated guess, I decided to ask the expert, my friend Carl, K9LA. Here's his response, quote, "The atmosphere at F2 region altitude changes throughout the year, specifically with the number of atomic oxygen atoms and molecular nitrogen molecules. Oxygen atoms are a good source for ionization, and molecular nitrogen is good for recombination. The summer months have a lower oxygen to nitrogen ratio, and thus the maximum usable frequencies are lower than in the fall and winter. 15, 12, and 10 meters will be back starting around September to October, and we should have great DX conditions again. This happens every year. You just have to wait for the fall and the winter months and be patient." Thanks for taking the time to explain. For more information on propagation and related topics, check out his website at k9la.us. It's a great source of information, not just on propagation, but 160 meters and a bunch of other topics. And I first stole all of his 160 meter stuff, so it's worth looking there if you want to learn. Each week, I try to focus on those entities that will be available in the next 7 days. There's so much data to sift through that I thought a focus on the next week might be helpful. Here's what you should find QRV when you tune the bands. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com, and I'll fix you up. Adrian, Golf Zero Kilo Oscar Mike, is QRV from the UK sovereign base areas on Cyprus, as Zulu Charlie 4 Mike Kilo until July 15th. He's running 100 watts to a hex beam for 20 through 6 meters and an end-fed half-wave for 40 and 80 meters. As usual, there will be special call signs during the big 3-week-long Tour de France bicycle race. The first call sign to listen for is Tango Mike 112 TDF, and TDF is Tour de France, with op F8GGZ. The second is TM25 TDF from the Radio Club Memeltra, and the third is TM59 TDF, all until July 26th. During the IARU HF World Championship, July 12th to 13th, members of the 3 Victor 8 Sugar Sugar, the Radio Club station of Tunisian Scouts, and 3 Victor 8 Lima Lima Giovanni will be teaming up at the Association of Radio Amateurs Tunisia's headquarters station. They will use both call signs during the contest. And I wouldn't say that a 3 Victor is rare, but it's not common. So if you need them, I would take some time in that contest and try to fill some band slots, or of course get them as an all-time new one. And that's what I'm going to do. The special call sign SN92LOT, active until July 31st, commemorates the 92nd anniversary of the ill-fated flight of Lithuanian pilots Stepanas Darius and Stasis Girinas. On July 15, 1933, they attempted a nonstop flight from New York City to Canal in just a small airplane. After crossing the Atlantic Ocean, they crashed on July 17th, 404 miles short of their final destination. And you can QSL this special event station via SP1 PMY. The Dave Coulter Memorial Youth DX Adventure announces that they plan to participate in a DX adventure to Curacao, operating as PJ2Y, until July 22nd. Quote, the Caribbean Contesting Consortium, PJ2T, Super Contest Station is hosting us for the 4th time. We look forward to seeing our host and friend, Uli Tilke, Delta Lima 8, Oscar Bravo, Quebec. This time, we will be operating as the DX and as a special event station. Operations by the Young Ops will be about 4 days and sometimes around the clock. We anticipate several thousand QSOs on most bands. This trip is sponsored by the Date Amateur Radio Association, DX Engineering, QCWW Foundation, along with several other clubs and individuals. Newly licensed monk Pasilipius SV2 TOW is a retired police officer from Greece. Many years ago, he decided to become a monk and to live at the Doceria Monastery on Mount Athos. Pending approval by the 20 Monastery and Mount Athos Council, he will be on the air as SV2 TOW stroke A, with the stroke A representing, quote, alternate location, end quote, as is typical in Greece. Fortuitously, Monk Persipilius will be able to use the equipment antennas left behind by Monk Apollo SV2 ASP, who became a silent key in May of 2019. This equipment was carefully placed in storage by members of the Greek amateur radio community following Monk Apollo's passing. Mount Athos is number 31 on the Club Log DXCC Most Wanted list for June of 2025. It was most recently on the air in January of 2025 with the SV1GA Stroke A DXpedition led by Adrian, KO8SCA. A Russian DXpedition team is QRV as Charlie 94 RRC and Charlie 93 RRC is an IOTA DXpedition to Chiloan Island, Mozambique until July 19th. Chiloan Island is off the west coast of Mozambique. The team hopes to run at least 2 high-power stations 24/7 on CW sideband and FT8 using Yaesu and Expert SDR radios and amplifiers into vertical dipole arrays, verticals, and 5-element 6-meter beams. TY5AD is a new Russian team-controlled remote station hosted by a local amateur near Cotonou, Benin. The station is capable of operating on 80 through 10 meters, running 100 watts into a vertical. QSOs will be uploaded regularly on Club Log. Those needing confirmations can check your contacts and make a QSL request. After requesting confirmations on Club Log OQRS, QSLs will be uploaded 2 or 3 days later to LOTW. NN3RP Raphael, using his Wine Yankee November 2 RP call sign, says that he, quote, will be calling CQDX vacation style again this summer, July 12th to August 4th, and that, quote, I hope to work as many of you as possible using FM satellites, FT8, FT4, RTTY, CW, and sideband. Charlie November 2 November Echo is a station that's going to be operated by Hotel Bravo 9 HLM Andre, and he will be on casually from July 15th to the 22nd, 40 through 6 meters. No paper QSLs are planned, but you can go through EQSL or QRZ. OK2WX, Vlad, has the the Juliet Whiskey Oscar Victor call sign for July 14th to the 23rd from Svalbard. He plans CW sideband and FT8 on 80 through 10 meters. And you can QSL direct to I8KHC and use LOTW. And that was I8KHC. TY5FR is QRV from Cotonou, Benin until August 6th with DL1 BUG Red operating. He plans CW and sideband on 80 through 10 meters. And you can QSL Red via DL1 BUG or go through Club Log OQRS and LOTW. KI6LT, Larry, is departing Monday, July 14th, headed for Georgetown, Ascension Island. So he should pretty much be there by the time you're listening to this. He will be QRV in his spare time as KI6LT stroke ZD8 until July 22nd. He'll have an FT710 and an end-fed 40-meter wire. Activity will be mostly single sideband. He will also have a whisper signal on 40, 20, 15, and 10 meters. And the most likely time to catch him on the air will be from July 18th to the 21st. If you're interested in DX podcasts and YouTube channels, you should check out the DX Mentor Facebook page and subscribe to be kept up to date on all of the DX activities. Please send me an email if you need information on any of the details or topics that I discussed. Until next week, this is Bill, AJ8B saying 73, and thanks to my ex-whale Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pileups. Have a great DX week.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a stream to your favorite digital device on Spotify, TuneIn.com, Overcast, iHeartMedia, and wherever you download your podcasts.
Welcome to the 39th segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio, Ham's organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our appreciation goes out to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for granting us permission to use his website in the production of these segments. Now, pull out the footrest in your recliner, sit back and follow along with us this next chapter of Ham Radio History. 22 in 22. Driven by rapidly expanding and radically changing uses of radio, a fitful and frustrating process of legislative and regulatory proposals and counterproposals was just beginning and would continue for a decade or more before it would begin to stabilize. As spring arrived in 1922, new broadcasting stations packed the air with signals as growing crowds of listeners in the general public clamored for even more. 10 years had brought changes unimaginable in 1912 when the first radio law was enacted. Now woefully inadequate, it urgently needed to be rewritten or replaced. That task fell to Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover, who convened the first radio conference, which included radio luminaries from across the spectrum: government, industry, academia, and the amateurs. The conference and its governing commission concluded by recommending 22 wavelength allocations. These would form the foundation for new legislation to finally replace the outdated law. Among the 22, amateurs were assigned a band from 275 to 150 meters, divided into subbands for spark, modulated CW, phone, and straight CW in that order, from long to short wavelengths. The portion from 275 to 200 meters would be shared with educational establishments. To avoid overcrowding in each geographical region, the Commission also prescribed a list of practices to be followed when assigning wavelengths to individual stations within each radio service. Dividing lines between services were still not sharply defined. For example, the conference explicitly proposed that amateur broadcasting again be allowed, reversing its previous position, and it recommended that direct advertising by radio be absolutely prohibited, either ignoring or attempting to counter the inexorable pursuit of commercial opportunities in broadcasting. In early June, the legislative process began again, with bills introduced in the Senate Committee on Interstate Commerce by Minnesota Senator Frank Kellogg as S3694, and the next day in the House Committee on the Merchant Marine and Fisheries by Congressman Wallace H. White of Maine, who had also been a member of Hoover's Conference Commission. Following the conference's recommendation, the bills would amend the 1912 law rather than replace it. Commerce's main purpose was to expand the wavelengths available to broadcasters and define a regulatory mechanism for all services, but the proposed law did not actually specify wavelength allocations or license classes. Instead, it gave authority over such matters to the Secretary of Commerce. Looking on the bright side, the ARRL expected this to finally impose some order on the chaos caused by the phone broadcasting boom. But although Hoover's commission had unanimously recommended that the new law explicitly define the status of the amateur service and its allocation, such a definition had been left out, and that was worrisome. although private operation was defined as being permitted between 275 and 150 meters, interpreting that as a grant of wavelengths to amateurs would be quite a stretch of the imagination, as judged by ARRL Secretary Kenneth Warner. The first three sections of the old law would be replaced in their entirety. Section 1 had stated that no one could transmit without a license granted and regulated by the Secretary of Commerce. In the new law, the role of the Secretary would be defined more explicitly to classify stations and operators, define their service, assign bands, make and arrange regulations, characterize transmissions, and assign call letters. Only the President could overrule any of these actions. Furthermore, stations owned and operated by the U.S. government for official business were exempt from the Commerce Department's regulations. In time of war, the President could close down any station of any type and remove its apparatus or use and control it while compensating the owner. How was not specified, only that it should be just. None of the old law applied to signals confined within a state or territory unless their effects extended beyond its boundaries or interfered with the reception of signals from outside. The 1912 law referred to the use or operation of any apparatus for radio communication as a means of commercial intercourse. The 1922 rewrite spoke instead of its use or operation by telegraphy or telephony as a means of intercourse. It was therefore more specific about modes and was broader in purpose, pertaining not just to commercial uses, but to any communication. Section 2 of both the old and new laws dealt with the handling of station licenses and their non-transferable nature, precluded granting them to foreign interests, and prescribed how licenses would be managed and revoked. No license could be valid longer than 10 years, but they could be renewed. The laws also protected against manufacturers using a license to monopolize radio communications. Section 3 of both laws specified that operation of a licensed station must be performed by a licensed operator. However, the new law required such licensees to demonstrate proficiency in the operation of radio apparatus and in transmission and reception of radiotelegraphy and telephony. New wording in Section 4 set forth rules for station construction. It specified that a station could not even be built unless first permitted by the Secretary. Such a permit could be revoked if operation did not begin within the time specified in the application. Furthermore, granting a construction permit did not imply or guarantee that a license to operate would be granted at all. On the surface, this meant that investing in building a station would be done at a station owner's risk. The new law's Section 5 would establish a 12-member advisory committee that the Secretary could assign to study various matters relating to his regulatory mission. 6 members would come from the Departments of State, War, Navy, Agriculture, Post Office, and Commerce. The other 6 would be chosen by the Secretary from among non-government people prominent in radio. Section 6 would specifically require radiotelephone stations that were capable of interfering with ships to have an operator constantly listening for distress calls while the station operated. In the original 1912 law, Section 7 itemized references to wavelength allocations. Now they would be stricken entirely, since their assignment would become the job of the Secretary. The remaining 4 sections dealt with administrative matters, including fees for amateurs. The Secretary could charge yearly license fees on a scale working down from $10 for special amateur stations and $2.50 for other amateurs to 50 cents for operator licenses, both first and second class. The ARRL board spent weeks analyzing the bill to formulate the League's position and recommendations in time for a congressional hearing on 2 January 1923, at which Maxim presented the proposed amendments. He believed that the presentation, well received by the diverse set of interests present, reflected well on amateur radio, writing, "One could not escape the conclusion that we organized amateurs have commanded the respect of the general public. It seems to be the idea that we have business-like methods, good American virility, a dear and also a broad vision, and that we know what we want and how to ask for it. A transcript of Maxim's testimony before Congress filled more than 3 pages in QST. He began by summarizing the services amateurs performed during the war and the potential for continued service to the country in times of emergency. He then told of the many technical and operating accomplishments that had been led by amateurs over the years. These were reasons why the amendments he was about to propose should be seriously considered. He offered a financial reason, too, the fact that 16,000 amateurs altogether spend about $1.6 million per year on their activities, and that made them worth having around for this reason alone.
A quick break for identification purposes. You're listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
Maxim discussed the general attitude of hams toward the bill, describing the caution with which all such bills introduced in Congress were analyzed to protect the amateur service. He stressed that amateurs unselfishly embraced the modernization of radio law, having been unjustly blamed for interference to broadcast listeners when the real problems had been things such as static, commercial stations, and electrical noises of various sorts. Maxim cited the voluntary quiet times observed by amateurs, even though the 1912 law gave them the right to transmit at any time they chose. So, with simply a desire for fair and reasonable treatment, the amateurs proposed a set of 8 amendments to the White Bill, laid out in detail, section and line, presented by Maxim during his testimony. The most important one was the explicit mention of amateur radio as one of the classes of stations and operators that the Secretary would regulate. Equally important was accepting amateurs from the subjective judgment of whether a particular station was in the interest of the general public service, as the bill termed it, before a license was granted. As written, the law did not say how that judgment would be made, and Maxim worried that it could simply be interpreted to exclude an amateur, or all amateurs for that matter, from qualifying for licensing if they were deemed of no direct and immediate public service. Aside from improving the wording, the ARRL's final amendment was to make more explicit the preferential treatment given to a government station by more precisely defining what that was. The League was worried about the term being construed as applying to any station, commercial or otherwise, engaged in handling any messages for the government. In the end, all this hard work proved to be merely a rehearsal for what was to come. The months of effort spent attending the conference, reviewing recommendations, and modifying the proposed legislation came to naught this time. The White-Kellogg bill died when Congress recessed a few weeks later, having met opposition in the Senate that could not be settled in time. In an effort to quickly regroup, Hoover called for another conference on 20 March to see what could be done under the flawed existing law to immediately deal with the broadcast and interference situation, such as freeing up additional wavelengths. Meanwhile, the ARRL Board of Direction urged all amateurs to observe a variant of the Rochester Plan, a time-sharing scheme, and refrain from transmission of any kind for the good of our game between 7 and 10 p.m. local time, except where local agreements already extend further. To emphasize the plan, the HZZ cover drawing from April 1923 depicts a ham sending something on his key, a big clock in the background hands just past 10 o'clock. Time for action. It was once a wild, unregulated, wide-open wireless world. To control the chaos, in 1912 the communal air was cut up into parcels of choice spectrum real estate, with hams relegated to the desert just outside the fence. 10 years later, the next wave of change was just beginning, emerging from the broadcasting boom. This time, active participation in the National Radio Conference, Hoover's endorsement, and Maxim's testimony had all firmly established amateur radio as a peer among the other services. But with a growing sense that the airwaves were owned by the public, accommodating broadcasters became the overriding concern, and all other services were expected to give something up. Hams were largely willing to comply because they believed that the only way to preserve amateur radio was to get ahead of the trends and voluntarily control, sometimes restrict their own activity lest they be forced to. And this would intensify as the development of the short waves in a few short years makes long-distance signals easy, borders permeable, and international agreements necessary. The establishment of bands of spectrum to each service will be welcome, but increasingly restrictive. Tightening regulations will force hams to develop better equipment to stay inside their own bands, to eliminate interference with each other and other services, and to get signals that are narrower, cleaner, and more stable. It will be nearly as big a revolution as the move from Spark to CW. Included in this material are quotes from the following: Kenneth B. Warner, The Radio Telephony Conference, QST, June 1922, page 15. Kenneth B. Warner, A New Radio Bill, QST, July 1922, page 32. Hiram Percy Maxim, The Hearings on the White Bill, QST, February 1923, page 23. With thanks to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for his permission to use his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Hams, Organizations, Events, Inventions, to prepare this chapter, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
The ham radio community is grieving the loss of Roger Smallwood, November 8, Echo Kilo Golf, President of Operations at R&L Electronics in Ohio for more than 40 years. Roger, who had cancer, became a silent key on Saturday, June 28th. In his online obituary, customers and longtime friends alike recalled his friendly, easygoing manner, his helpfulness, and his much-anticipated appearances at Dayton Hamvention. Many recall the family business he helped build, which earned the popular nickname The Candy Store for its assortment of amateur radio equipment. Roger was 55.
The National Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting has been around for more than 20 years. But a project supported by a $500,000 grant has transformed its World War II vintage building, the former VOA Bethany Relay Station transmitting plant, into a world-class repository of communications history and knowledge. The 30,000-square-foot, two-story building was deeded over to the township of Westchester, Ohio, following the VOA's closing of the station in 1994. Little of it would be recognizable to those present when the transmissions began in late 1943. The facility was constructed by the Crosley Broadcasting Corporation under a contract from the Office of War Information as part of the initial VOA initiative to disseminate accurate reporting of wartime news to Axis nations. It had languished and fallen into disrepair following its abandonment by the VOA. The infusion of funding now allows artifacts to be better displayed, as well as making the facility more accessible and comfortable for visitors. The largest item on display is a 1960s vintage 250,000-watt 821A Collins shortwave transmitter that was abandoned in place when the GSA ceded building and grounds ownership to the local government. The giant transmitter has been extensively labeled to allow visitors to better understand what they are viewing. And while the government did remove the antennas en masse, museum volunteers have constructed scale models to illustrate how the site once appeared. The facility is anchored by VOA artifacts and exhibits, but Jay Adrick, president of the museum board, is quick to remind visitors that from the 1920s onward, Cincinnati, just south of the Bethany site, was a broadcast industry hub. This heritage is reflected in exhibits. In addition to Crosley's massive manufacturing and broadcasting operation, Cincinnati was home to the Codell Radio Corporation, the original owner of station WKRC, said Edrick. Other radio receiving and equipment manufacturers calling Cincinnati home included the Midwest Radio Corporation, which sold their products directly to consumers. There were about 40 radio and radio parts manufacturers in the Cincinnati area, added Lee Hitt, a museum curator and docent. This was the Silicon Valley of its day. It was the center of broadcasting, the center of radio, and the center of the technology at the time. Crosley's flagship, WLW, once had the distinction of being the most powerful radio station in the country, operating with 500,000 watts during the 1930s, and referring to itself as the nation's station. To provide programming, Crosley amassed an impressive group of entertainers and personalities, many of whom would become nationally famous. Museum visitors have the opportunity to experience some of this broadcasting history through exhibits featuring profiles of several of the on-air performers. While the 1/4 megawatt Collins rig is the largest such item in the collection, it is by no means the only transmitter. Volunteers have restored to like-new condition an early 70 kilowatt shortwave transmitter built and used by Crosley. Other artifacts included a massive 100 kilowatt water-cooled triode, one of 22 used to power the WLW 500 kilowatt rig. The museum will continue to be a place where the voice of America is celebrated as one of the most effective uses of broadcasting.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. Recently I was helping a friend erect their newly refurbished multiband antenna, and during the process we discussed the notion of tuning an antenna that's high in the air. They made a curious response, in that they tuned the antenna on the ground before we started. I asked how this would work, since, as I understand the process, this changes things once it gets in the air. They assured me that while the actual SWR might change, the frequencies at which it was resonant would not. This was news to me because I've been putting off erecting my own multiband 6BTV antenna mainly because I didn't really want to face having to erect it, tune it, lower it, modify the elements, erect it, tune it, etc., all while standing on the steel roof of my patio. Would this phenomenon be true for my antenna? It occurred to me that I could test this idea, not only for my antenna but for other antennas as well. In my mind's eye, I saw a video displaying the pertinent attributes of an antenna, SWR, gain, radiation pattern, and whatever else I could think of, animated with the modifications of things like height and ground radials. If this sounds familiar in some way, it's because I've been here before. This time the outcome was slightly different, since I found a tool that can optimize antennas using a genetic algorithm. What I mean by that is an automated process where you can test variations of a thing, in this case antennas. Rather than design each antenna and test it, you essentially generate antenna designs and tweak them to determine the best one. Then you use that to generate the next series of designs. Rinse and repeat until you have what you're looking for. There's a whole field of computer science dedicated to this, and unsurprisingly, the rabbit hole goes deep. The tool is called XNEC2C GAO, and it's written by Maurizio Delta Charlie 1 Mike Delta Papa. The name of the tool hints at its nature, working in combination with XNEC2C, written by Neoclis 5 Bravo 4 Alpha Zulu and maintained by Eric Kilo Juliet 7 Lima November Whiskey. You'll find links to both tools on the xnec2c.org website. How the two tools work together is a beautiful dance. The antenna modeling tool, XNEC2C, can read an antenna definition file and detect if it changes, at which point it can redo the simulation, which you can output to another file. The genetic algorithm optimization tool, XNEC2C-GAO, can detect the changed output and update the antenna definition file, and the process repeats. Which brings me to a pro tip. For this to work, you need to configure XNEC2C to do two things: detect the changed definition file and write the output to CSV. Both of these options can be found in the Optimization Settings menu, just so you don't spend an hour banging your head against the desk. Between the two tools, the antenna definition evolves, and you end up with a design optimized for your purpose. The default does this for SWR and gain, Mind you, I tested a multiband dipole which managed to find some interesting designs, but didn't pick them because a low SWR combined with a high gain, for reasons I don't yet understand, wasn't considered better than a high SWR with a high gain. So there's some work to be done. As a software developer, I have a sneaking suspicion that it's adding the two rather than picking the highest gain combined with the lowest SWR, but I haven't confirmed that. As I said, deep rabbit hole. While we're not yet at the video display stage, for the first time I can get a sense that this might come to pass. There's plenty of work to be done. For example, the antenna display on XNEC 2C during the process seems broken. There's no way to output GNU plot files during the process, and capturing the various charts in real time will require work. But all that seems, if not easy, at least possible. Meanwhile, I'm attempting to locate an antenna definition file, preferably in .NEC format, for my 6BTV antenna, so I can use this combination of tools to discover if tuning it on the ground will work, and, while I'm at it, discover if the installation I'm working on will give me something worthwhile. I realise that this is well beyond try and see, but my body isn't up to climbing up and down ladders 17 times in a day, and I think that getting a feel for what might occur is a good way to learn. When was the last time you climbed on a roof, and what did you do to avoid it? I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
A long-time unlicensed radio operator in Massachusetts has agreed to a consent decree with the FCC, resulting in a reduced civil penalty. John Marius was issued a forfeiture of approximately $600,000 in April of 2024 for operating Radio Teleplanet Compass, which was heard in Brockton, Randolph, and the Boston area. It broadcast on 89.3 FM and more recently 105.3 with Haitian language religious programming. After receiving the notice of apparent liability, the commission said Marius sought reconsideration based on his inability to pay. The Enforcement Bureau reviewed his financial status and, through a Boston field office agent, confirmed he was no longer operating the unlicensed station. As a result, it proceeded with a consent decree which resolved the outstanding notice. Marius must pay a civil penalty of $10,000 to the U.S. Department of Treasury within 30 days. It requires him not to commit any further acts constituting pirate radio broadcasting within 20 years, or else face a penalty of approximately $600,000. The Radio Teleplanet Compass website notes that this year is the operation's 23rd anniversary. Marius' history with the FCC goes back to the year 2004, when agents from its Boston field office traced the source of an 89.3 FM unlicensed transmission back to his house in Randolph, Mass. According to the commission's account, he admitted to agents he was the owner and the operator of the equipment in question. Marius received verbal and written warnings to cease operation of the station, but, according to the commission, had failed to do so. This first issued a notice of apparent liability for the broadcast in November of 2005. The commission also filed a notice of unlicensed operation against him in 2017, which it said he signed and accepted. Agents detected transmissions in Brockton and Mattapan, traced to the Radio Teleplanet Compass in 2023, which resulted in the apparent recent notice. The operation now appears to be streaming only, according to the station's website.
A Miami area pirate radio operator is pushing back against a $2.39 million FCC fine, claiming the agency's penalty is unconstitutional and pointing to a blockbuster Supreme Court ruling that would scuttle how the FCC punishes unlicensed broadcasters. Fabrice Polinis, who FCC Enforcement Bureau agents found to be operating the unlicensed station Radio Touche Douce from February to March 2023, argues that the penalty violates his constitutional right to a jury trial under the Seventh Amendment in a new filing, referencing recent court rulings that limit federal agencies' authority to impose civil fines without judicial oversight. Polinis has a history of additional pirate broadcasting dating back to at least 2012, per the Commission. In his appeal, Polinis argues that the FCC's forfeiture process violates constitutional protections affirmed in SEC v. Jerkesy,
which found that administrative enforcement proceedings seeking punitive fines fall squarely within the definition of suits at common law and must be tried in federal court. Citing that ruling, Polynice asserts that the FCC's enforcement process of allowing only a written response and no hearing fails to meet constitutional standards and should be overturned. A white paper by former FCC Deputy General Counsel Peter Karangia, attached to the petition, supports this interpretation and warns that most FCC forfeiture actions may now be unconstitutional unless Congress reforms the agency's enforcement powers. When Polynice's fine was affirmed by FCC vote in September, then Commissioner Nate Symington dissented, citing similar reasoning. At the time, Symington said under new and controlling Supreme Court precedent, the Commission's authority to assess monetary forfeitures, as it traditionally has done, is unclear. Until the Commission formally determines the bounds of its enforcement authority under this new precedent, I am obligated to dissent from any decision purporting to impose a monetary forfeiture. I call on the Commission to open a notice of inquiry to determine the new constitutional contours of Commission enforcement authority. While Polynice's petition leans heavily on recent constitutional rulings, it's unlikely the FCC will grant reconsideration. The agency has not indicated any intention to revise its enforcement practices in light of jarcossy, and no legal action has been filed, at least not yet, by Polynice's team. If jarcossy were applied to FCC pirate radio enforcement, it could upend the agency's ability to impose civil penalties against unlicensed broadcasters, effectively stripping the FCC of its primary enforcement tool. Such a shift would leave the Commission with few practical consequences for violators, aside from seizure of equipment or criminal referral in rare cases. Still, no pirate broadcaster has ever successfully challenged the FCC in court. While Polynice's petition raises high-stakes constitutional questions, it also underscores the legal uncertainty surrounding the future of administrative enforcement in broadcast regulation.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. This week of the Tevel 2 family of satellites, number 3 is active. However, there appears to be some distortion. They are working on fixing it. It could be the uplink needs to be adjusted by 5 kilohertz or so, or an issue with the squelch. The uplink is supposed to be 145.970 megahertz, and the downlink is 436.400 megahertz, both FM. Hopefully, after this satellite is working properly, the other Tevel 2 family satellites will be activated. There are 9 of them, and they all have the same up and down links. The only way you will know which one you are working is by where your antenna is pointing. ARRL Logbook of the World is back online at its new cloud server. Be sure you keep your ARRL Trusted QSL or TQSL program updated. When new satellites get their Oscar number, you need to do the update for the program to recognize the contacts. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time once again for the weekly space weather and propagation forecast. Spaceweather.com reports solar activity was at low levels with only C-class flares observed. The largest flare during the period was a C8.9 from an unnumbered region beyond the east limb at S13. This region was also responsible for the majority of the remaining flares alongside regions 4136 and 4137. An approximate M2 was observed by Solar Orbiter at 1326 UTC, just beyond the east limb. Brightening can be seen in the SUVI 94 channel at this time. A slow-moving coronal mass ejection was observed in coronagraph imagery, modeled, and was determined to not have any impact. Solar activity is expected to be low with a chance for M-class flares, minor to moderate, through July 13th, primarily due to the flare potential of region 4136. Solar wind parameters remain at nominal conditions. Nominal solar wind conditions are expected through July 11th. The corotating interacting region associated with a positive polarity coronal hole high-speed stream is expected to arrive on July 12th. An enhancement of the solar wind parameters will follow the arrival and remain enhanced thereafter. Unsettled to active conditions are likely starting on July 12th, as Earth moves into a geo-effective position with a positive polarity coronal hole high-speed stream. There is a decreased chance for minor to moderate radio blackouts on July 11th, with most regions on the visible disk rotating off and no appreciable spot groups rotating on. Conditions could increase on July 12th or 13th, as old regions 4117, 4118, 4120, and 4121 rotate back onto the visible disk. Although solar activity is lower this year than it was last year, it is still at the maximum level of the 11-year cycle. Moreover, it is quite possible that it will increase further this year. This is indicated by the continuing slight predominance of activity in the northern half of the solar disk, while in the southern half we more often observe relatively large coronal holes. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation page of Karl Lewetzelschwab, K9LA. Also, you can read Understanding Solar Indices from the September 2002 issue of QST. For customizable propagation charts, visit the vocap online for Ham Radio website.
Just ahead in Radio Sport this week, a lot of great contests. On July 11th, it's the QRP Fox Hunt, that's CW, and the NCCC FT4 Sprint, that's digital. July 12th to the 13th, the IARU HF World Championship, CW and phone. July 14th, the Four States QRP Group Second Sunday Sprint, CW and phone. July 15th, the ICWC Medium Speed Test, that's CW. And July 16th, the RSGB 80-meter Club Championship, single sideband and phone. And July 18th, the NCCC FT4 Sprint Digital. And remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions on July 12th. It's the Story Valley Amateur Radio Club Hamfest hosting the ARRL North Dakota section convention. July 13th, the 2nd New Jersey Hamfest hosting the ARRL Hudson Division Convention. July 26th, the ARRL West Virginia State Convention and Hamfest. That's in Sutton, West Virginia. And on August 2nd, the ARRL Maine State Convention and Hamfest. That's in Augusta, Maine.
Russia is planning to press ahead on the country's Russian Orbital Station, or ROS, following the demise of the International Space Station in 2030. At that time, the first ROS modules are to be lofted. It will become the world's first drone platform equipped with robots for its maintenance, said the first Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, Denis Manturov. This is a patented solution of the Russian Federation. Testing the technology will allow us to apply this format to our Luna program, he said. We will continue to increase the number of communication devices in near-Earth, geostationary, and highly elliptical orbits. Thus, we expect to cover the entire territory of the country, including the Arctic, with stable communication channels by 2030, he emphasized. Also in news from Russia, on June 6th, the Iranian embassy in Moscow reported a pivotal meeting between their ambassador and the CEO of Roscosmos, the Russian State Space Corporation, where discussions centered on the joint production of satellites, marking a significant step in deepening bilateral space cooperation.
Now that Field Day is over, there is one more thing you can do if you would like to participate in the scoring process for AMSAT Field Day. Email your submission sheet. If you do not have the submission sheet, go to amsat.org and under Events, select AMSAT Field Day. Download the rules. The satellite summary sheet is at the end of the rules. The satellite summary sheet should be used for submission of the AMSAT Field Day competition and be received by KK5DO via email by 11:59 p.m. CDT, Tuesday, July 29th, 2025. This year, we are using the same due date as the ARRL. The only method for submitting your log is via email to kkk5do@amsatnet.com or kk5do@arrl.net. No mail-in entries. Add photographs or other interesting information that can be used in an article for the AMSAT journal. You will receive an email back within 1 or 2 days that your email submission has been received. If you do not receive a confirmation message, then try sending it again or send it to the other email address.
Ambrose Tripp L. Owens, N4NTO, passed away on July 4th, 2025. He was 57 years old. Tripp Owens, N4NTO, a well-regarded POTA activator, died on Friday, July 4th, when, according to investigators, his antenna mast made contact with an overhead power line at the Chickasaw Civil War Cemetery near the Avarisboro Battlefield Historic Site, US 11375. According to several local news reports, emergency crews were called to the scene after Tripp was found unconscious in the parking lot. One news report said that the fire crews found him with his foot touching the mast beneath the power lines. Power company crews turned off the power to give the responders access. Tripp was pronounced dead at the scene. He was an avid participant with POTA, activating over 660 parks. Owens was an ARRL member and belonged to the Potomac Valley Radio Club. He held an amateur extra class license and earned his first amateur radio license in 1985 when he was 13 years old. A report on the QRPer.com website relayed information from Dave W4JL, who said Tripp had been spotted on the reverse beacon network between 12:02 and 12:13 UTC that morning, but noted on the POTA spots page that he was going QRT. QRPer's Thomas Witherspoon, K4SWL, added, "This is heartbreaking news for those of us in the Parks on the Air and WWFF communities." Tripp was a well-known and well-loved North Carolina POTA operator, a dedicated hunter and activator whose call sign appears in my logs many times over the years. Many condolences have been posted on social media. He was a great CW op, and I had many POTA QSOs with him, said Thomas Court, VA2NW. Services were scheduled for July 10th at the Calvary Episcopal Church in Tarboro, North Carolina. Meanwhile, Michael Dean, K5MFD, ARRL Oklahoma Section Public Information Coordinator, passed away on July 7, 2025. He was 77 years old. Dean was first licensed as a technician in 1991 and upgraded to a general class license in 2010. He served as a public information officer since 2013 and as Section Public Information Coordinator from 2014 to 2016 and since 2019. He was also the Section State Government Liaison since 2016. Dean was well known as the University of Oklahoma Sooners radio engineer and producer for the OU football and basketball teams. He was known for his unmistakable and iconic voice and storytelling. Dean worked as a historian of everything and served in the U.S. Army Reserve and as a United States Marine.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
The 2025 Moon Day, a space-themed public STEM event, will take place on Saturday, July 19th at the Frontiers of Flight Museum at Love Field in Dallas. Held each year close to the date of the Apollo 11 moon landing, the event features hands-on science exhibits and activities for all ages. Moon Day runs from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time, with setup beginning at 8 a.m. Central Daylight. Retired Colonel Carl Walls, formerly KC-5TIE, will deliver the keynote address at the Dallas Frontiers of Flight Museum during Moon Day, which celebrates space exploration and encourages attendees to participate in activities involving science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Moon Day is taking place July 19th, a date close to the July 24th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing in 1969. The Ohio native, a former ISS astronaut, spent more than 18 hours conducting spacewalks to evaluate tools for the refurbishment of the Hubble Space Telescope. AMSAT will once again be represented at the event by AMSAT Ambassador Thomas Schuschler, N5HYP, along with several North Texas satellite enthusiasts. They will engage with the public, including many young people, on topics such as satellite orbits, the International Space Station, and amateur radio in space. Exhibits will include the AMSAT Fox CubeSat engineering model and the CubeSat simulator, and the team hopes to demonstrate a few live satellite passes during the day. Tom is seeking additional AMSAT volunteers from the North Texas area to help staff the exhibit table. The AMSAT booth will be located next to the Dallas Amateur Radio Club exhibit, providing opportunities for great conversations with fellow hams, as well as curious families. Volunteers receive free museum admission and lunch. Anyone interested in helping for part or the entire day is encouraged to email Tom at n5hyp@arrl.net. More information about the event is available on the web at flightmuseum.com/events/Moonday.
It is time for this week's edition of AMSAT Satellite Shorts from All Over, and we begin this week finding that a newly discovered interstellar object is only the third such interloper to be observed in our solar system. The object, provisionally known as A11PL3Z, is not expected to pose an impact risk to Earth, but gained attention on Tuesday, July 1st, when it was spotted by telescopes for NASA's early warning system for asteroid impacts. Speeding through our solar system at about 245,000 kilometers per hour relative to the Sun, it is currently located just inside the orbit of Jupiter, 528 kilometers from Earth. It's uncertain at this time if the object, which will get a new name when it is approved and published by the Minor Planet Center, is a comet or asteroid, but observations so far have helped track the object's journey, indicating it likely came from outside of the solar system from a thin galactic disk. Next comes word that Methane-Sat, the Environmental Defense Fund methane tracking satellite backed by the Bezos Earth Fund, is lost in space. Its ground team lost contact with the spacecraft on June 20th, but tried to re-establish a connection until it learned in the morning of July 1st that Methane-Sat had lost power altogether. The team believed that the satellite is likely not recoverable. Methane-Sat collected data on methane emissions that have previously been untraceable in an effort to combat climate change. Methane is the second largest contributor to global warming after carbon dioxide, with agriculture, fossil fuels, and waste decomposition being the largest sources. And our final story comes to us from SpaceX, who launched its 500th Falcon 9 rocket to date with an overnight Starlink flight on Wednesday, July 2nd. The first stage booster used on the mission also flew for a record-setting 29th time. The mission, dubbed Starlink 10-25, lifted off from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station at 0628 UTC. A little more than 8 minutes after liftoff, the booster landed on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas, completing the 472nd booster landing to date.
The Senate version of the budget reconciliation bill, backed by President Donald Trump, removes protections for unlicensed spectrum that broadens the capacity of the 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi band. This could result in slower Wi-Fi speeds. Under the bill, the FCC would sell off some of the spectrum to mobile carriers, which could use it to improve the speed of their mobile data. The bill includes a provision that requires the FCC to auction 800 megahertz of spectrum, including bands allocated by the FCC in 2020 for unlicensed use. The version of the bill that passed the House excluded the band of the frequencies between 5.925 gigahertz and 7.125 gigahertz, which includes 6 gigahertz. However, there's no such exclusion in the Senate version. The FCC could force to sell off as much as half of the unlicensed spectrum currently in the 6 gigahertz band, according to public knowledge. Senator Cruz, chair of the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, says the new spectrum auction will help prepare carriers for the next wireless leap. However, as recently as this month, AT&T stated that it has no pressing need for additional spectrum. One thing a spectrum auction will do is generate more revenue for the government to offset the tax cuts in the bill. Removing this spectrum from unlicensed use could negatively impact the 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi band, which added a huge swath of capacity to Wi-Fi when former FCC Chairman Ajit Pai made 1,200 megahertz of spectrum available for unlicensed use in 2020 during Trump's first term. The 6 gigahertz band is used by Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi 7 to deliver faster speeds over a wider swath of channels, increasing both speed and reliability of Wi-Fi, especially with tri-band routers. The 2.4 gigahertz and even the 5 gigahertz bands are becoming increasingly congested as we rely more and more on Wi-Fi in our homes and businesses. Devices that use 6 gigahertz benefit from a wider, less congested superhighway to travel on, which reduces latency and increases speeds. In a letter to crews and other committee members urging them to keep the 6 gigahertz band unlicensed, the Wi-Fi Alliance states that the 6 gigahertz band is the foundation for Wi-Fi's continued development and growth, as well as playing a pivotal role in enabling technologies of the next decade, including artificial intelligence, advancing manufacturing, augmented, and virtual reality. The letter was signed by Apple, HP, Comcast, Amazon, and Meta, among others. Technically, 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi has the same theoretical top speed as 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, 9.6 gigabits per second, the maximum offered under the Wi-Fi 6 standard, the current version of Wi-Fi. You're still not going to get that speed in real life, but the new airwave should help bump your speed up. That's because the limited spectrum available at 5 gigahertz means Wi-Fi signals are often not as large as they could be. At 6 gigahertz, it's assumed that the routers will broadcast at the current maximum allowable channel size, meaning a faster connection. FCC Chairman Brendan Carr is in favor of selling off portions of the unlicensed spectrum.
Masayoshi Ibisawa, known as Mashi, JA1DM, longtime DXer, DXCC card checker, CQDX Hall of Famer member, friend of ARRL, and former director of the Japanese Amateur Radio League, JARL, passed away in March 2025. He was 92 years old and for many years performed work on behalf of the DXers in Japan and elsewhere, and through his efforts leading the DXCC card checking group for ARRL and JARL. He sought out and trained card checkers, organized sessions, trained volunteers, and arranged for QSO card checking at JARL HQ and at the large Tokyo Ham Fair events every August. He wrote a book simply titled The DX Century Club Award, DXCC for Japanese Hams, which explained DXing, QSLing, and the logbook of the world in simple terms with lots of pictures. One of Massa's fondest milestones was being inducted into the CQDX Hall of Fame in 2025 at the DX banquet at Dayton. Massa made numerous trips to the Dayton Hamvention as representatives of the JARL and a partner of ARRL.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Full ARRL members in the Pacific, Rocky Mountain, Southeastern, Southwestern, and West Gulf divisions have the opportunity to choose a director and vice director to represent those divisions for 3-year terms beginning January 1st, 2026. ARRL is governed by its board of directors. A voting director is chosen by ballot by the full licensed ARRL members in each of its 15 divisions. Vice directors who serve in the absence of the director at a board meeting and succeed to the position of director should a vacancy occur are chosen at the same time. Elections are held in 5 divisions per year. It only takes 10 full members in a division to nominate a candidate for either office. The eligibility of nominees for the position of ARRL Director and Vice Director will be reviewed by the Ethics and Elections Committee, composed of 3 directors not subject to election this year. They are Scott Yonali, N8SY, Brent Walls, N9BA, and Tom Frenay, K1KI. A nominee must be at least 21 years old and must have been licensed and a full member of ARRL for a continuous term of at least 4 years immediately preceding nomination. Each nominee must provide information concerning their employment, ownership, investment, interests, and other financial arrangements to ensure compliance with the Conflict of Interest policy, available at www.arrl.org/general-information. The qualifications for director and vice director are identical. All the powers of the director are transferred to the vice director in the event of the director's resignation, recall, removal outside the division, inability to serve, or death. The nomination procedure is as follows. Step 1. Obtain official nomination petition forms. Starting July 1st, any full member residing in a division where there is an election may request an official nominating petition package in writing, either by letter or via email to execadmin@arrl.org. The request must reach the ARRL Secretary no later than noon Eastern Daylight Time on Friday, August 8th, 2025. If you are seriously considering running or nominating someone to run, please don't wait until the last minute to request the forms. The deadline for submitting a completed petition form is just 1 week later. Step 2. Complete the questionnaire and obtain signatures. Only the official form may be used. The candidate must complete page 1, providing the information required to determine eligibility, certifying its accuracy, and agreeing to assume the office if elected. To be valid, a nominating petition must name the candidate and must bear the signatures of 10 full members of the division. Step 3. Submit the petition form. The completed form must reach the Secretary no later than noon Eastern Daylight Time on Friday, August 15th, 2025. The submission may be made by electronic transmission of images or facsimile, provided that, upon request, the original documents are received by the Secretary within 7 days of the request. A person who is nominated for both director and vice director may choose to decline the nomination for director. Otherwise, the nomination for director will stand, and that for vice director will be void. On Monday, August 18th, 2025, the Secretary will notify each candidate of the name and call sign of each other candidate for the same office. Candidates will then have until Friday, August 29th, 2025, to submit a 300-word statement and a photograph if they desire those to be made available to voters in accordance with instructions that will be supplied. If there is only one eligible candidate for an office, he or she will be declared elected by the Ethics and Elections Committee. If there is more than one eligible candidate for an office, the full members in that division who are in good standing as of September 10th, 2025, will have the opportunity to cast ballots. Official voting documents will be mailed to members who are eligible to vote no later than October 1st, 2025. Votes must be electronically cast, or completed paper ballots must be received at the designated P.O. Box in the envelope provided by noon Eastern Time on Friday, November 21st, 2025. The candidate receiving the most votes will be declared the winner that day. A full member who is residing temporarily outside his or her home division, including overseas, may arrange to vote in the home division by notifying the Secretary before September 6, 2025, giving their current mailing address as reflected in the ARRL membership records, and the reason why another division is considered home. Members with overseas military addresses should take special note of this provision. In the absence of information receiving to the contrary, ballots will be sent to them based on their postal addresses. The incumbent directors and vice directors, respectively in the 5 divisions in which elections will be held this year, are: in the Pacific, John Litz, NZ6Q; Rocky Mountain, Jeff Ryan, K0RM, and Dan Grady, N2SRK. Southeastern, Mickey Baker, N4MB, and Andy Miluzzi, KK4LWR. Southwestern, Dick Norton, N6AA, and Ned Stearns, AA7A. And West Gulf, John Robert Stratton, N5AUS, and Lee Cooper, W5LHC.
Club Log, a service that has become a mainstay for DXers worldwide, has received an $8,000 grant in U.S. currency for a hardware upgrade to improve operations. The funding from the Northern California DX Foundation is being given to Michael G7VJR, Clublog's author. In a DX Foundation press release, Clublog reminded users that the expensive upgrade of its servers is necessary to support the expanded activity. Michael said once the new servers are deployed, Clublog will be using cutting-edge servers, which are faster, more energy efficient, and ready for years of high-endurance, 24/7 work. According to a press release from the DX Foundation, the free Clublog statistics service supports an estimated 130,000 call signs worldwide and stores records of 1.25 billion QSOs.
The silencing of the last maritime radio station in the U.S. in California in 1999 gave voice to an effort to create the Maritime Radio Historical Society, K6KPH, to preserve its treasured Morse code tradition. Every year, the event, called the Night of Nights, celebrates this tradition on the anniversary of the day that the station signed off, ensuring that July 12 would not mark the station's final sign-off after all. Broadcast engineers, radio operators, and history enthusiasts have seen to that. They volunteered to bring new life to the receive site at the Point Reyes National Seashore and to the Bolinas radio transmitter site, returning Morse service to the station known as KPH/KFS. This year's 26th edition of the Night of Nights is a collaboration of modern skills and classic-style equipment, including Marconi T-type antennas at both the transmitter and receive location. KPH and KFS will continue to operate on assigned commercial frequencies, while K6KPH will be operating on several HF amateur radio bands. For time, frequency, and QSL information, please check the Maritime Radio Historical Society website at radiomarine.org.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
Japanese amateurs are marking a double anniversary, both spanning 100 years. They're celebrating the establishment of the Japan Amateur Radio League in June of 1926. The league was created to assist innovators and experimenters who were conducting their radio research without benefit of a license. That changed in September of the following year, when the call sign Juliet X-Ray Alpha X-Ray was assigned by the government to the first of what would soon become a handful of radio, telegraph, and telephone stations. Ham radio kept growing, so that just before the Second World War, the nation had 300 such stations. Hams in Japan will be marking those two formative moments in history during a celebration designed to last 16 months, the same time period between the events 100 years ago. Awards, ceremonies, special event stations, contests, and an anniversary book are among the activities planned. Clearly, there's a lot to celebrate in that 100-year stretch, which last year landed Japan in the Guinness Book of World Records for putting Juliet Sierra 1, Yankee Mike Golf, the first amateur radio station, on the moon.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-Ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon.
And finally this week, French cuisine has a reputation for being among the world's best. So what's a French astronaut to do when faced with the prospect of spending months aboard the International Space Station eating freeze-dried food straight from the packaging? Recruiting a Michelin-Starred chef to reimagine French classics like foie gras and lobster biscuit was the answer for Sophie Astronaut, KJ5LTN, who is to undertake her final space mission in 2026. The meals designed by Annie-Sophie Pick will make up the bonus food taken to the ISS during Astronaut's Epsilon mission. The European Space Agency said in a statement on Tuesday, July 1st, food in space is typically freeze-dried and comes in plastic packaging from a list of pre-approved items, the ESA said. Fruits and vegetables are a rare luxury that are available only when a spacecraft arrives with supplies. Astronauts, however, are able to have specially catered bonus food that makes up about 10% of what they eat. This is usually developed in partnership with a chef, and astronauts say it boosts mental well-being, adds variety, and helps them bond with fellow crew members when shared in orbit, according to the European Space Agency.
Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet. This Week in Amateur Radio is streamed on the Internet, broadcast on low-power FM, and heard on nets and repeaters all around the world, like the K2IWR repeater operated by the Skyline Amateur Radio Club on 147.180 MHz in Cortland, New York, where This Week in Amateur Radio is heard each Tuesday evening at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to have your club's repeater announced on This Week in Amateur Radio, send us an email with all the pertinent information to w2xbs77@gmail.com.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.